It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Sarah Goodman. Your maiden name was Lustig. And Sarah, you came from Germany. You were
I was born in Germany.
So if you could tell us a little bit about your family and...
Yes. My father was born in Poland, in Mikołajczyk, and we had a difficult time finding this place because there were similar names there. And he was the oldest of 4 children, a very Orthodox family. Today we would say modern Orthodox, they're not extreme. 2 boys and 2 daughters. My father was born in 1904. When he was 16 in 1920, the situation was difficult all over the world. It was kind of a repression. Anyway, his parents asked him to do a big thing for them. They sent him to Poland to live with an uncle and learn a trade and make some money. He went to an uncle in Düsseldorf, Germany, and the uncle was a tailor. And he very quickly started earning money. And if he had a little bit of money, he sent it to the parents. Now, they were very clever. They didn't spend it immediately. They managed to save some of it. And by saving, they eventually opened up a small restaurant and a small rooming board of some kind. And at that time, the area that they lived in was very welcome to tourists. And children's youth groups used to come from Bnei Akiva, Shomer Hatzair, and others. It sounded weird, but this is what I read. This was a little bit of quiet between the 2 big wars. Now I'm jumping ahead. My father meets my mother. Somebody introduced them. My mother is German-born, but her parents are from Poland. And in those days, that was very important. Today, we don't insist everybody be from the same country. I have grandchildren married to children from other areas, whose families are from other countries. And we love them all. Anyway, they decided to allow them to go and do some dating, but not like today. They didn't let young people just run around. They always gave them someone to accompany them. And my father, at the end of his life, never told us much about the Holocaust at all. Excuse me. But he would like to tell us funny things. And his funny story was how he and my mother managed to trick this woman who was supposed to accompany them and lose her so they could have some private time together. This was his idea of a nice story to tell. It's funny, especially in today's times. But that was about the beginning and the end of what he would relate. My mother didn't relate a lot, but she spoke. She had a cousin who came to visit constantly, and it was only when I worked on our book that I realized that this cousin was closer to my age than to my mother's age. And what did they do? They exchanged stories. When I want to say, my father and mother worked very closely together, and we never saw any problems, any arguments between them. And in those days, the man ran the house. That was very accepted. I'm making that point for a reason. I'll continue with my story. In any case, he met my mother. They decided, the parents, my mother's name was Hilda from the house of Kaufmann. Or was it Friedman? Friedman. And my father's name was Max Lustig. His Hebrew name was Mordechai. And in later years he was called Max. His Polish name was Mordko. He was born in 04, she was born in 12. Before they got married, the parents wanted to meet, so that I have a picture that they took a trip and they met the relatives in Poland, and they quickly discussed it, and everybody agreed this was a very good match. Okay, there's a picture here. This is not an engagement party like we have today, but this is the meeting before they got married in those days. And this is my father as a young man with one sister.
Sir, if I could just see it again. These are very precious pictures.
Yeah.
And can I just ask, how did these pictures survive?
Well, that's part of my story. And I don't want to jump ahead on that. Any case, they decided they're getting married. They got married in 1930. She's 18, he's 26. This was a very accepted age gap. And they left Dusseldorf after my oldest sister Susan, according to my records, was born in Dusseldorf. She was born in 1932. When I was born in Dortmund. So at some point they had moved. And they had a shop. My father, because of his knowledge with tailoring, opened a shop selling materials that people bought. People at that time did a lot of home sewing. And we had a small apartment over the shop and internal steps. I'm jumping ahead now. It's time for me to be born, 1936. But the Germans have been busy making Nuremberg laws whose main purpose is to make life totally impossible for the Jews. Now there's a long, long list of things that are forbidden, but in my story I relate to the specific items that refer to us. And the first one I have to say is Jews are not allowed to use hospitals. So my mother realized she has to give birth to me at home. Okay, they're not worried about that. They're going to get a nurse to help her. But they had thoughts about it that Susan, my oldest sister who's 4, maybe she shouldn't be present. Maybe she'll hear or see something. Okay, they'll send her to a nice aunt, my mother's sister Molly, who lives not far. Nothing wrong with this program, with this idea, except they didn't send her for a day or two. They sent her for a few weeks while my mother recuperated. And they didn't realize in those days what today, psychologically, we realize that that's not a good idea with a child of 4. The child feels rejected. Now I'm jumping ahead. Susan is 6. She's starting school. She's very excited. She's a bright girl. She wants to learn. She's in school. I don't know what kind of a school. Makes no difference. All schools are forbidden to Jews. Whether it's a Jewish school or a German, doesn't matter. She's in school a few weeks. I don't know exactly how long. And that's it. She's kicked out. Again, no one explains. And she doesn't know why this is being done to her. She thinks she did something bad. Maybe her parents will be angry. We don't know. Now I'm jumping ahead to the night of the broken glass, which we call Kristallnacht. It's November 9th, 1938. And the German police, the Nazis went crazy. There are many, many reports of what happened. Thousands of people arrested, thousands killed, stores wrecked. A terrible, terrible night. We are sleeping above our store. My oldest sister hears noises from the street and doesn't know what she's hearing. So she goes to wake up my parents. And she wakes up my father, and he jumps out of bed and grabs his winter coat. Why? No, I don't know, out of some instinct. My mother in later years said the coat protected him. How did it protect him? The Nazis broke into the store, wrecked the store, and ran up the steps that were clearly visible to look for the man. At that time they were arresting men, not the women and the children. And in the process of arresting him, part of their method is to throw him down the steps. I didn't know this was part of the method, but apparently very popular among the Nazis. So that was her point about the coat protecting him. And what do they do with him? They drag him off to a small local jail. Dortmund at that time was not so big like it is today. If you look today in Google, it's a big city. He went to a local jail. The camps had not yet been established in 1938. And my mother in the morning, her first thought was they took him in pajamas. She wants to bring him clothes. So she goes, I think she walked there. I'm not clear on the details because they never sat down and gave us a clear story. And we pieced it, and I say we, I mean my sister Hadassah and I, pieced the story together with time from information from other people and from all other sources. In any case, one thing she told us, or I overheard her telling somebody else, that she bought him his watch with his clothing, and some kind guy there, very unusual to find a kind guy, in a German prison, told her, don't give him the watch, it won't be with him long. Anyway, we're taking them to a work camp. My mother goes home, what work? They took the clothing. She says, work camp, what does that mean? When you're living in the middle of it, you don't know what we know today as history. She had no idea where the war was, that it was going to be a war, where it was going. It just didn't sound good to her. So she comes home with a decision in her head to try and get us out. Us, me, 2.5, and Susan 6.5. How can she get us out of Germany? She has no idea. She starts asking relatives. She cannot ask her parents because her parents in 1933 had already left Germany and gone to what was then called Palestine, which is today Israel. Along with them went my great-grandmother and their daughter. So advice she got from other relatives, from her sister. In any case, the point with getting advice is to know which advice to take and which to reject. And she was asked if she has any relatives living in another country. Yes, in Belgium, Mishpacha, the family Frisch, good cousins. She calls them up, and I tell young children, yes, we already had telephones in 1938. And they say, of course we'll take the children. We have 2 small girls about the same age. They make up a plan how to take the children. Jews are not allowed to travel on trains. My mother could not go with them, like any normal arrangement would be. They had a nanny. They sent the nanny with the girls' papers, the girls' passports. And the little kids' faces look similar when you see it on a little passport, if anybody even looked at it. My mother meets us at the train and hands us over. I don't get any kind of an explanation. I don't know what Susan at 6.5 understood. But here I am on a strange train with a strange lady, I never met her, and we're off. My mother was very brave. She had tremendous faith in the Almighty to do such a thing. And without being able to get my father's okay on it, he's sitting in jail. And on the train, as a normal 2.5-year-old, I start chattering, and my older sister was clever enough to shut me up. And the nanny answers anyone who asks. She says, these Belgian girls went to Germany to see a special doctor, and I'm taking them home. Obviously, it's a big story, not a true story, but it worked. We were all 3 in danger of our lives if the Nazis had realized what was happening. My mother gets a phone call. It wasn't a big trip. I usually talk to groups with a big map, and I show them Belgium is very close to Germany, especially Dortmund. The area we lived in is close. So it wasn't a big trip, and we get there, and my mother gets a phone call. They've arrived safely. Her next thought is to get my father out of jail. Now, how do you do that?
Sarah, can I ask, was the nanny Jewish?
We don't know her name, and we don't know if she was Jewish or Christian, and it makes no difference because she was a very brave woman to go and pick up strange children and do this.
And do you know what happened to her?
And we don't know what happened to her, no. There are holes in the story, but that's normal when you write the story after so many years. The book we wrote came out in 2004, after 4 years of working on it. So whatever information we had, I'm happy we had as much information as we did have. In any case, my mother gets a call, and her next thought is to get him out. How are you going to get him out? Impossible. So again, she gets advice from people. And my mother had applied, my parents both had applied also to go to Palestine, which is today Israel. And the British had said no. Enough from that family came. So they applied for America, and they had visa for America. But America was giving them out according to country of birth. So my parents had only 3. For the 3 who were born in Germany, my father, being Polish born, did not get a visa. And therefore they never used them because they didn't want to get separated. So at this point she wants to get us out, so she looks at the visa and she discovers they're not dated, and then they've expired. So again she gets advice about a man who's a forger. My mother was a very well-behaved, polite, decent citizen, never went to a forger in her life, didn't even know what that meant. But she's following orders, suggestions. She goes to the forger. He makes the visa, he updates, changes the date to make it be valid, and builds her a 4th visa for my father, a forged visa. And under people's suggestions, she goes with the 4 visa in her hand to the little jail where he is. And she comes with some money. I don't know how much, but she was told, you will need to pay a bribe. But in 1938, the Germans still allowed people to leave if they could show where they were going. So she got him out. That's another miracle. Because he was already standing in line in the courtyard with hundreds of other men about to be placed on all kinds of huge trucks to be taken somewhere. Had she come a day later, I would not be here telling my story. So she goes home with him and she tells him what she did with the girls, and of course he's not angry, he's happy to hear that they're out of the country. And they enter their wrecked store and they realize they have nothing to do anymore in Germany. The people who love their children want to join them, don't want to just leave them with relatives. In any case, what can they do in Germany? It's obviously going in a bad direction. Okay, we want to leave Germany. How are we going to do that? Jews are not allowed to travel on trains. That's the Nuremberg laws. Again, they get advice, and people tell them about a smuggler. Just like my mother never heard of a forger, she never heard of a smuggler. They were law-abiding. That's the word I was looking for before. They were law-abiding citizens. Okay, there's no choice. They go to the smuggler. How do you get to the smuggler? He's not in Dortmund. He's somewhere else, not far away. And to reach him, they have to get on a train. Again, a train is not allowed for Jews. So they were told how to go on the train. This is the part that is incredible. And only this year, when I spoke in the week of the Holocaust Day, somebody confirmed my story. I've been talking for 20 years. I know it's true. They rode under the train. They held on people told them there were long rods that you can hold on to lying downwards. You can't travel like that with children. So it's, thank God, the children were not there anymore, and you cannot take suitcases. And this is how they traveled, and it sounds incredible, and every time I tell it, it sounds incredible. But this month, when I spoke, somebody came over to me and said he heard the same thing from his family. I never found it written anywhere. I don't know if the Nazis ever caught on to this trick, but all of their examinations in the train station were done on the trains with people sitting on the trains. They never looked who's wandering around, and they didn't check people entering. Like here in Israel, when we had checkups, they were at the entrance. They didn't do that. So they could walk in, find the train they wanted, crawl under it, hold on for dear life, and travel, and reach the town they wanted, whose name I don't know, and come down again, and nobody saw them, nobody caught them. Now, they only had with them whatever they could put on their clothing, in their pockets. My mother even sewed jewelry into her coat. They obviously could not take packages. Okay, now they're meeting the smuggler. The smuggler is another wise guy. He, of course, asks for money. He has a huge truck. On the front is a cabin for the driver. And in the back is a huge area for the merchandise, which is wooden logs. And in between, either he did it himself or somebody helped him, he built a tiny hidden cabin that's not visible from outside. And he sticks them in there and tells them to be quiet and to stand stiff and straight. And 2 seconds later, he pushes in 2 young girls, Jewish girls, who had also paid. They're not people that my parents know, they're not related. And everybody's standing quietly, and off he goes. And everybody's paid. Of course, there are checkups. They come to the first checkup. It has to stop the truck. It's Nazi German police. He has to show his documents. They look at the merchandise. I guess they decided it was too much to unload. They say, okay. They gave him an okay to continue driving up. But just to be sure, they take out their pistols or whatever they had, and they shoot, bang, bang, into the truck. Maybe they hit somebody. Maybe there's somebody there. Now, nobody was hurt. They heard the shooting. But for the driver, it was a good excuse to behave in an ugly way. He continued driving till he went far enough away that there were no checkups. As he stops the truck, he must have had a slit or a little window so he could speak to the hidden passengers. And he says to them, look how terrible it is, look how dangerous it is, my truck is getting ruined, on and on, I want more money. So they pay him more money. And then he continues traveling, and the second time the same story, and he pays them more money. And the third time, again he demands more. My mother gives him a piece of jewelry, and the 2 young girls, whose names I don't know, tell him, we don't have anything left. He says, out. And he wants to dump them in the middle of the way. Now, my father could not see this. He had no responsibility. He didn't know how far his own money would last. He just could not be a witness and a partner to such a tragedy. And my mother completely supported him. And they immediately paid for the girls. And the driver continued, no more checkups. He knew where to stop, where in the Belgian border there wasn't any official. The girls got out and they thanked my parents. And my parents crossed the border. Now, I don't know the names of the girls. I know they were Jewish girls. I don't know if they survived. I just know that my parents did this huge thing, and in Hebrew we call it a mitzvah, a very huge good deed, and maybe that was part that they got rewarded for. Who knows? But it's just a very warm-hearted part of their story. Okay, now we're sitting, and me and my sister and the relatives, the Frisches, are waiting. And they didn't really believe they would come, but I figured maybe. Even though there was no internet, they knew what was happening in Germany. It didn't sound very good. And they knew the Jews weren't allowed to travel. So lo and behold, there's a knock on the door, and they're surprised. They open the door. Now I'm sitting there. I haven't seen them for 3 months. I'm not sure who this is. And then suddenly there's a click, and I burst out crying. And Susan starts crying, and my mother's crying, and Mrs. Fisher's crying. And it's a hysterical scene. And my father's sitting on the side. He's also, I don't know if he was in tears, but he looks at the scene and he makes two very important decisions that I repeat over and over. One is never to stay in a country invaded by Nazis, and the second decision is not to separate one from the other. Excuse me.
And Sarah, can I ask, do you have memories of that meeting with your parents?
No. A lot of this, I was too young. Obviously, I wasn't with them. I was in Belgium when the meeting that we all cried, I don't remember. Perhaps deep down it's somewhere. But I'm not traumatized because I was only 3 months without my parents, and I was in a comfortable home in Belgium, in Antwerp, where there was no war at that time. Now, my father my mother moved in. People found them a small apartment. And about those two decisions, the two decisions accompanied them all the years, because this is what pushed them. Other people would wait to sell some piece of something, or they would wait for a relative to join them, or they would wait for someone to get over a cold. Waiting was always more dangerous than to continue going. It took us 2.5 years from Belgium to get to Portugal. After Portugal, you hit the water. Now, in that trip, certain things happened that I must relate. They stayed in Belgium for a year. At that time, they heard about the Nazis are about to come in, and my father said, let's get out of here. My father created a fake passport without any knowledge. I actually saw it, but it got lost. In my mother's later life, I don't know what happened to it. He just took a piece of cardboard and sewed it and put our names in it. And it was accepted because the people working at the borders also didn't know what they were doing. So the first time I got this stamp, it was like getting a kosher stamp. But in France, something marvelous happened. They were in a very small town, and the people there were very kind, Catholic Christians, and the priest was especially kind. He saw these poor people who've arrived. They could see from the looks on them that they're not in good condition, and he asked the people to make them a meal for them. They also, of course, the meal included things they wouldn't eat, like pork products. In any case, they found a place for them to stay. There was an empty castle. And most important, they found work for the men. Every morning the men were given chemical canisters on their back, and they went to spray vineyards. And they waited a few weeks, and a few weeks make a big difference, because one fine day, French police come in. They heard there were Jews here. We have to arrest Jews. My mother was very upset, very angry. Did we get this far to get rearrested? Wow. They left the women and children and took off the men. Now, this was a small town and a small jail, and my mother organized a demonstration. She knew a bit of French. She took the whole group was 25, 30 people. She took a few other ladies. They marched down into the town, found where the little jail was, and started screaming, "They're innocent, let our men go, they're working, they're not a burden on society." And they screamed and screamed and screamed. I'm not sure that the police themselves really wanted to do this. Maybe they just got orders to look for Jews, because France at that time, this is the beginning of 1940, was not yet being run like that. In any case, they released them. And I have to say, bottom line, my mother managed to get him out twice. This is an incredible story. They come back to that little town and they think, they all together decide, let's not stay here. They will come again and maybe our screaming won't help. So we start our wandering through France and Spain and Portugal. But in France, before we left France, we got to a place called Bordeaux. And in Bordeaux, we were very blessed by the Almighty that we met a man named Alista de Sousa Mendes, who was a representative of Portugal. And his job was to give visa to people, but not to Jews, and not to other undesirables. What other undesirables are, everyone can figure out for themselves. And he was doing this, and there's a film about him, and he saw what was happening in the street, and people were running and running because it's wartime and everybody doesn't know where to go. And some rabbi was in touch with him, and he was a very Orthodox Catholic. This man, Alista de Sousa Mendes, I took this down from my computer. He gave people visa. He gave a lot of people. He has a name that he saved more Jews in one night than anyone else throughout all the years. And he had a very large family. And at some point, he decided he's not agreeing with the orders that he was given. This is very unusual for politicians. And my parents and I and my sister Susan were given visa. And this helped us with our travel. And I make a point of mentioning him because he deserves all the attention. Now, all the years later, his family founded a foundation, the Sousa Mendes Foundation, and they've been working to clear his name. 40 years after he died, Portugal announced he was a hero. Obviously, it was not the same government. Way before that, Israel recognized him as a righteous Gentile because they heard stories from people who arrived here. This man became very important. And just this year, a few months ago, there was a place in the city of Jerusalem, I live in Jerusalem, where his name was put on the sign of a street, and this was sent to me. This is a special honor that not everybody gets. Any case, we took what we took from him, and then it was easier to go. And things happened, but I don't want to go into a lot of little details. Things happened everywhere we went, and somebody asked me, what do I actually remember? I remember being in some cramped place, and I'm about 4 years old. My father's holding me up, and I'm yelling in German, meine Füße, which means my legs, because the crowds of people were crushing each other, and my parents, my legs were being squashed by other people's suitcases. My father shifted me around to free my legs, but he constantly held on tightly to Susan, because his nightmare was to lose somebody. If you lost a person, when the mobs of people were running around, you never found them again. So we went through Spain, and we got to Portugal, and Portugal was quiet. The war never actually reached Portugal, but we didn't know that. My father's idea was, we have to get out of Europe. And he went from one consulate to another, to a third, to a fourth, and everywhere he got no, no, no. The British said no to Palestine and no to Britain. The Americans said no, and all kinds of other places. My father was always optimistic. In between trying to find some work and trying to survive, he kept going and going, and one fine day he got to Cuba, and Cuba said, okay. It's only lately that I've found out the reason. All these years I never knew why. The reason is simple. My father knew how to work with diamonds, and I have met other people who tell me that their father worked with diamonds, who also made the trip from Portugal to Cuba. Because in Cuba there was a big diamond industry which was working with the States, and apparently they appreciated having more people who had those talents. I suppose when you apply for a visa, one of the questions you were asked besides your name and your date of birth is, what do you do? And him saying that he knows to work, he was a diamond sawyer, I think this was part of the reason we were surviving. Any case.
Sarah, can I ask you, when you went via Spain and Portugal,
yes,
do you have any memories of that journey, or?
Very, very vague. I was very young. My sister was sent to school. My sister learned in 4 languages. My parents always said education is important. So wherever they got stuck, we had no official trip. It took 2.5 years. They didn't know one day to the next where they would sleep. And they didn't know where to get me new shoes when my feet grew. I remember a story in Portugal that my sister came home with an eraser that my father knew wasn't hers, and he made a big scene about it, teaching us never to take things that don't belong to us. This was our education. I don't believe that she had a future as a big thief, but he made the point very clear. You don't pick up something that isn't yours. This I remembered. I remembered being in a tunnel and bombs falling, and the people, we were in the inside of the tunnel. The walls of the tunnel protected us. I'm not sure if that was in Spain or in France. And when we went out, we saw dead bodies. I didn't know this. My sister Susan told us it was the first time she's ever seen a dead body. We could not help anyone. We had nothing to help with, and we kept on going. Okay, I'm talking about Portugal. One day my father comes home. He's got tickets to Cuba. Now he needs a boat. Boat tickets are also difficult. One day he gets boat tickets. We organize ourselves, and we go down the day that the boat is supposed to leave. And he presents his tickets, and we are told, those places are taken. Somebody sold tickets double. Another person looking to get rich on the backs of suffering immigrants. There we are standing, and the boat is leaving. My father, optimistic. There'll be another boat. What he did do, he decided to move closer to the port so that we could reach the boat when he finds another boat more rapidly. So all 4 were in a small dingy little apartment, and we waited. And eventually he came back.
Was this in Lisbon?
This is in Lisbon, yes. Lisbon. I do remember something. We saw a hurricane. We were in a building where the bathroom and showers were downstairs for everybody, and the apartments only had rooms, and there was like a covered porch around, and we could see things flying that don't usually fly, like big furniture pieces. It was a hurricane. Anyway, back to my travel trip. He comes home. He's got tickets for another boat, and I have a picture of the boat here, if I can find it. No.
I think it's... In Lisbon, did your family ever go to the shul?
Excuse me?
Did they ever go to the synagogue in Lisbon?
Yeah. Yeah, no, they kept everything. Here's the boat. This boat is called the Serpa Pinto, and it was doing shuttling back and forth between Portugal and Cuba. And I met somebody who was on this boat, but not the same date. And I found the picture on Google. Any case, we got 10 days after we arrived, my sister Hadassah was born. That was another reason my father wanted to leave Portugal so urgently, because my mother was pregnant, and he dearly didn't want another child born in burning Europe. The part of Europe that we knew was all in flames.
And so, do you remember that trip, the boat trip? Do you have memories of that boat trip?
Very little, no. We arrived in 1941. I was 5 years old. Hadassah was born June 12, 1941, may she be well. And we wanted, Cuba is located below Florida and very close to America. And our plan was not to live in Cuba, but it was a stepping stone to get into America. But in the meantime, the Americans said, enough. They're getting tired of all these immigrants coming and coming. So we stayed in Havana for a few years. We stayed 4 years. And I used to say we got stuck there, but that's not really a good word, because we had a reasonable life there. My father found some work. My mother ran a kitchen in her kitchen. We went to school. We were in a Jewish school. And at some point, my name had been Sigrid all these years, a German name. And in Cuba at age, just before we left, I said, I want to be called Sarah. Now, I don't know if I dreamed up the name or if I recognized it as my Jewish name, because I haven't found a document. March 1945, a couple of months before the official end of the war, we took an airplane to Miami and a train trip to New York City. Our uncle Leo Hausler, my grandmother's brother, had prepared an apartment for us. It was small, but it did the job. It was in Washington Heights. And that's the main story. And eventually I joined B'nai Akiva because I was going to George Washington High School, which had a lot of Jewish kids, but none of them were my style. They didn't keep the Sabbath, they didn't keep kosher, they didn't know from any holidays. I didn't feel I could go home and visit them in their homes. So I was very happy when I joined B'nai Akiva, which is a very big religious Zionist youth movement. And I was in it for years. I became a counselor, and eventually I went to a training camp which is called the Hachshava. It was in Jamesburg, New Jersey. And from there I made a decision to come and live in Israel. My father objected, but he was visited by Eli Klein, Zichrono Levracha. Eli Klein at that time was the head man of B'nai Akiva, and he had a private talk with my father. And one of the things that helped convince my father is that I actually have family in Haifa. My grandmother and my aunt were there. They had come more, but my uncle had died. And he came. So I went with B'nai Akiva, and my program was to go to Kibbutz Shluchot. We had that, at that time, B'nai Akiva's main aim was to live in kibbutzim. Today, they're more open about it, and people have B'nai Akiva groups in cities also. And in Shluchot, I met Rafi Goodman, whom I knew from my days in the training camp, and we decided to get married in 1958, October. A kibbutz wedding that my parents came and joined, and that year there were weddings every month because there were a lot of young people there. But after a few months, my husband then decided that he had a BA from Yeshiva University. He really wants to do another degree. Possibly he wasn't that happy with the kibbutz, and I realized I wasn't going to argue about it if he wants to go back. The plan was to go back for 2 years. He did get his MA. In the article it says 14 years, but the problem with the time is after he got the degree, we did not have the money to go live in a city, and we had decided not to return to the kibbutz. To come to Israel is a wonderful idea, but it's a little easier if you have a little cash to be able to make your arrangements. Therefore, it took us a few years, and in 1973, we came back with our 3 wonderful children who were born in New York. Yonah was 13, Moshe was 8.5, Tova was 5.5. Very excited, all 3 of them, to come to live in Israel.
And Sarah, it's amazing. But Sarah, can I just ask, you had pictures.
Yes.
Amazing pictures of...
this is a good story. I can add this. This is a story in 1947. 1947, we were somewhat settled. We're making a living. We're managing. The grandparents are in Haifa, and they want to see the children they haven't met, and Susan that they only knew as a baby. So they come planning to stay a year to visit. We had a wonderful time. My grandmother baked wonderful things, and they went to the synagogue with my father. But war broke out. Palestine became Israel, and there was the Israel Independence War, and my grandparents, 66 years old, said, "We must go back to help." And my parents were horrified. "How can you go to war? You're much too old to help. What are you going to do?" No, they wouldn't listen, and they went back, and I'm sure they helped. They found ways to help without having a weapon. Yes. My grandmother's name was Yente, and his name was Yente Moshe Friedman. We took Yente, when she was deceased, we took Yente, we took the Yud and the Nun and the Hey, and that's the basis of my son Yonah's name.
In the other pictures, you have a beautiful picture of
This is before the war. This is my sister Susan and me. 1937. I'm 1 and she's 5. This is me with my mother in peaceful times in Belgium. This is my father and mother in peaceful times in Germany still, walking with, that must be just Susan. And these are cousins who are mentioned in my book, but they're not relevant to my story.
1 minute, Susan.
You want to take it more?
Such a beautiful picture, Susan, that these pictures survived as well. It's
Yes, and I have to explain how we got them.
How did you get these pictures?
Yes. When my parents traveled under a train, they could not take pictures. Eventually, my grandparents sent them pictures. That's how I got them. Sometimes somebody in the audience, when I speak, says, how'd you get those pictures? I'm not playing tricks. I got them from my parents. Yeah.
And in these pictures, Sarah,
this one you want?
Yeah.
This is the engagement party in Germany of my mother's oldest sister, Molly. Molly and her husband went to Palestine in 1933 with my grandparents, and he had no work. Eventually they opened a shop. But in the beginning he helped pave roads, and he would say, I considered myself lucky if I earned 1 lira a day paving roads, because the country was not built up yet. These are some cousins that my uncle managed to bring to America, but my grandmother was not interested in his generous offer, and preferred to make her way to what became Israel. And the bottom picture is in 1920. My grandparents, you can see they look prosperous, way before the war years.
It's amazing that the family was a very Zionistic family. Yeah. And Sarah, can I just ask you, did you, when you came to America and you were in Crown Heights, did you speak with your friends about the Shoah, the Holocaust, what had happened to you during the war?
It's very interesting because I met a good friend. I just had connections with her after my article came out. We were together in the training camp in New Jersey. I didn't know her parents were survivors, and she didn't know about mine. We went together to Hachsharab, to Kibbutz Shluchot. We were part of the same group. In the same year we got married. I attended her wedding, she attended mine. Years later, and her brother came on the same flight as my parents to attend the weddings because they were so close together. Years later, when she read my book, she heard my story. Recently, she put out a book about herself and her husband, who's deceased, who was a survivor. And he went through, and she met him in kibbutz. And she said she liked my book. She used it as a model to help her. Yeah. But as kids, we didn't know. We didn't talk. It wasn't relevant conversation. What do young girls talk about? What they're going to wear?
Did any of the other kids ask you?
No.
And your parents, did they mix with other survivors in Crown Heights?
Yes, my parents, that's in the book. My parents moved to a larger apartment than Uncle Leo got us, and there were constant visitors, and they would talk about the weather and talk about this and that, waiting for the girls to go to sleep. And when they thought the girls were asleep, and we weren't, they talked they were all people that were survivors with numbers on their arms, traumatized. Nobody knew from psychologists, nobody had money for psychologists. Their therapy was to talk to each other. And we overheard stories and stories. I went to sleep every night to the rhythm of their conversations. This one came to the train station and left his suitcases and never came back. The suitcases were left there. And this one was betrayed by someone he paid money to. All horrible stories. A lot of stories about our own family we overheard. My mother had a cousin who visited her frequently. It wasn't considered proper subject for children.
And what happened to your parents' extended families in Poland?
Yeah, that my mother's family, I talk about. This, my father's family, that's the question. Years ago, I became very active in talking. I've been talking for 20 years. I talk with a group called Zikaron Salon, which means memory in the living room. And at one point, they sent me here, they sent me there. They hooked me up. This is a very interesting, if you have time. Zikaron Salon made a program to help fight all the lies that are out in the media, people who say it never happened. They made matches between a person who has a very big blog of 2 million or 3 million, non-Jewish, who likes to write in a blog, with a survivor. I've been matched up with a wonderful young woman named Susan. Susan is from Taiwan. That's why it says in my article that I was speaking to Taiwan. That's the connection. And I was told by the people organizing, they're going to give me someone to talk to who has great influence. I had no idea what great influence meant, but as usual I said fine. So she sent me a note. She came to visit me. I lent her my book. And it turned out, later on I found out, she was in Jerusalem on a sponsorship from Taiwan, from the Israelis in Taiwan, because she'd visited Israel years ago. In Taiwan they do not teach anything about Holocaust, so she had no idea of anything. Came here on a routine trip, and one of the places she was taken to was Weidwagan, and she was horrified when she heard about the story of the Holocaust.
That's it.
And this got her involved in writing about it years before she met me. And therefore she got a scholarship to come to Jerusalem and get a second degree, get an MA in the department of the Hebrew University that is meant for foreign students who don't know Hebrew. And I said to her, so what's your subject? Her subject is Jewish history. And I said to her, well, that's very nice. What's your thesis going to be on? You do a degree, a master's, you have to have a big subject that you investigate. I'm fascinated with her subject. She investigated the attitude of today's population to the German reparations money. And she asked me, do I think it was enough money? And I said to her, no amount of money in the world would ever have been enough. There is no such thing. Are they forgiven? I said, Samar, and that. My parents took the money, and this is what helped me pay to enter this lovely retirement home. But I don't believe my father forgave them for killing 250 of his immediate relatives. He figured it out when he was at the end of his life, and my sister visited him. They wanted to come and live in Israel, but he did not have medical insurance here. And the beginning of his medical history started. Took a few years. And my sister went to visit him, and he sat down and he made names. His parents were both from very large families, and he came to the number of 250. He met one man who had gone into they were from Mikulichin when the town was attacked. This man had gone into the woods to look for food, and when they came out with another man, they heard noises, and they saw their families and neighbors all getting killed. And they obviously didn't go into the town. And my father met this man years later, accidentally somewhere in Israel, and my sister heard them, but they were speaking Polish to each other. She couldn't follow the conversation. I would like to summarize. I started saying something about my book. My book has gone all have you take a picture of this? Yeah. Has gone, I use it as a basis, but I've gone way beyond the book, because with the years I find more important, more up-to-date information than what I wrote about my cousins. That I was invited to with this woman from Taiwan, and I got a letter, it's over there, from with a big magnet on the side. That's from the, that one. From our foreign office, I got a letter of thank you for working, taking the time to meet with my friend Susan. Now Susan came here about 30 years old, a lovely looking young woman, not married, and she met a lovely man here who happens to be from Singapore. And they had a wedding, which I did not attend, last summer. They got married in a Christian church, and last week she had a baby. And I said to her in Hebrew, Mazal Tov. And I have already crocheted something for the little baby. Now these people are not interested in becoming Jews, but they like living here, and they're very seriously Christians, and they're doing good work, and she's continuing her good work, and he's a tour guide. So it's been very I have interesting things to relate, as I said, and I was asked to visit Moscow because the film about Sousa Mendes was going to be shown there, and they were looking for survivors. In the end, it was only me. This is me in Moscow talking. Now I only have to speak half the time because I'm speaking English and someone is translating. And this one of these, I forget which one, comes here very frequently to work with Yad Vashem. And I was only in Moscow for a day and a half because they showed this film. Important film, I think.
And Sarah, have you been back to Germany?
Why would I go to Germany? I have no roots in Germany. All my roots are deep, deep in Israel. This is my homeland. I have no reason to go there.
Shorish roots or to go back?
What am I going to show my children? I was there till age 2.5. And besides, do you think my children don't want to go to Germany? I'll tell you a good story about that. My grandson Aviraz, my daughter's second son, finished his army, and a lot of the kids, before they start higher studies, want to do something. And somebody suggested to him to go to Germany as a part of a Bnei Akiva group to help young people who are coming from Russia, to give them guidance. And he went, and he met a young woman there, and she's from Israel, and she was doing the same work. And they're married today, and they have 3 children. And why did he meet her in Germany? He could have met her here in Bnei Akiva. She doesn't live that far away. This is obviously our higher power planning. The wonderful young family, wonderful. And he's a social worker. Now all my children are following our ways, and I say the reason I'm popular is because I have a happy ending. My sisters and I together have almost 60 great-grandchildren.
So here's a picture of your sisters.
No, this. This is the biggest picture. This is on my 85th birthday. And not everybody's here because there's a group doing missionary, emissary work. Emissary work, and they've come back since. And somebody's doing guard duty for the army, and there are a few babies in the carriages. But this was taken out 2 years ago at my 85th birthday. And they're all here. They're all doing wonderful things. I have 12 married grandchildren already. The 4 that aren't married yet aren't quite, are just getting to that age, 18, 20. And together we have all these great-grandchildren would not be here if my parents hadn't had tremendous faith, tremendous help from the Almighty, and a lot of get up and go and initiative and courage, and they got us out. And therefore, I'm happy to say all my children.
So here's a wonderful picture of your sisters.
This is the 3 of us. My sister Susan died a few years ago from a heart condition. And this is my sister Hadassah, who also lives in Jerusalem. This was taken 20 years ago. We were 20 years younger and healthier when we went to visit my sister who was ill at the time.
And Sarah, if I can...
This is in New York.
That's wonderful. Sarah, if I can ask you, what message do you impart to your children, grandchildren, and future generations?
I give them a message. First of all, you should have faith. Whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim, have faith in the Almighty. It very, very much helps. I believe very much that my parents found certain powers suddenly. I also think it's very important to be connected with family. You want to sit down next to me?
No, and coming
My
to...
family is very important to me. They give me a lot of honor. They come and just last week they took me to dinner because it was a birthday. When it's a round number, they make a huge thing with everybody coming. But in between, they also make me something. So just last week we went to a restaurant. Just my 3 children with their partner, their mates, and me, 7, and we had a very nice little get-together. But other times we have a huge party like this. We also have very big get-togethers to honor coming on Aliyah. This year, God willing, Hanukkah, we are going to be celebrating 50 years that we came, because we came in 73. And we celebrated 40 and 45. And the children say to me, thank you for bringing us.
Israel's very important. It's a very
important.
It's a focal point.
This is our homeland, and this is where we belong. And there's lots to do here. Everybody finds his corner, what he wants to learn, who he wants to marry, what he wants to do with his life.
And Sarah, this is such a beautiful picture that you have of your family. So I just want to thank you so much. I'm so incredibly grateful. And,
well, you have to come to someone who's prepared, because I've been doing this and doing this.
But Sarah, I must just tell you, I saw this wonderful article, and I think this was in this week's Jerusalem Post, and it is amazing, a remarkable story.
They wrote about my sister and brother. She did. Yeah.
But it's a beautiful, remarkable story of survival. And Sarah, really, your story is remarkable. It's incredible. And your book, Fleeing Europe, where you have, it's amazing. And I am so incredibly grateful to you.
I say I don't have a BA and I don't have an MA, but this is my doctorate.
It's more than a doctorate. This is just so special and so valuable, and it's so inspiring.
During Corona times, I spoke on Zoom, and I'm living in this place. Sometimes I get a call from some school. Do you have somebody?
And you always do it voluntary. All your life you've done voluntary.
I only ask for trips.
That's
travel.
Amazing.
Now, my daughter has told me not to go distances anymore. I went to an hour trip to speak to Upanat B'nai Akiva, 260 girls, 2 years ago. She said, Ima must speak.
Well,
Jerusalem keeps me busy.
So you should just continue. You should only have mazel and bracha.
Mazel and bracha, that's what they say, the diamonds.
Mazel and bracha, but really, you are an inspiration to all of us, and I'm so grateful to you.
This article is hanging on the bulletin board downstairs.
It's wonderful. But Sarah, really, you should be at Maybe Stream in good health, and just nachas from your family.
Nachas is unbelievable.
And
unbelievable.
Sarah, you really are such an inspiration that we can all strive to emulate. You are amazing. You really are.
I do a lot of different things besides this. I volunteer, as the article said. I volunteer and
Well, you should continue, and thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you.
You're turning it off.